Okay. All right. Well, I'm back, and since the last time I did a video, I was not living at a monastery and becoming a monk, so I am now. So I've been a little bit busy. So let's see. Let's get to. We were on page 50, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I did this. Yep. All right. So back with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and here we go. It says in 1903, the Protocols were published in Russia in mass circulation in the newspaper Znamya, and publisher P. Khrushchev provided the publication with a preface that from the translator, where he wrote, "The protocols were written by the Zion representatives. Do not confuse them with the representatives of the Zionist movement," and taken from the whole book of protocols, all the content of which could not be written because of the short time given to the read them. Thus, as well as the testimony of Stepanov, Khrushchev, and the kidnapper of the protocols, the translators speak in one person. The most authoritative publisher of the protocols, S.A. Nilus, gives two versions of their appearance in Russia. 1. In the book, The Great and the Little, Nilus writes, in 1901, I managed to get at my disposal from a close friend of me, now deceased, the manuscript, which was extraordinary clarity, depicts the course and development of the world's fatal mystery of the Jewish Masonic conspiracy, which has led the apostolic world to the inevitable end for him. The person who handed me this manuscript certifies that it is a copy translation of the original document, stolen by a woman from whom the most influential and most dedicated leaders of French Masonry, after one of the secret meetings, quote, dedicated somewhere in France. This manuscript, under the general title Minutes of the Meeting of the Sages of Zion, I suggest that those who wish to hear and listen. 2. In the third edition of the Protocols, in the book, quote, close as it is at the door, Nihilus puts it in a little differently. Quote, in 1901, we managed to get one manuscript. This manuscript was titled Protocols of the Meetings of the Sages of Zion, and handed over to me by the late Chernogorsky, district leader of the nobility, later Stavropol, Vice Governor Alexei Nikolaevich Sukhotin. Along the way, Sukhotin told me that he, in turn, received this manuscript from a lady who lived permanently abroad. That this lady, the Chernian landowner, and that she met in her some very mysterious way. Sukhotin also said that this lady gave one copy of this manuscript to Sipyudin. Sipyudin? I don't know. Then Minister of the Eternal Affairs, on her return from abroad, that the Sipyudin was killed afterward. Okay, so whoever that was got killed. Two more versions of the appearance of the protocols in Russia are connected with the name of Nihilus. One on behalf of Nihilus, told by a certain Alexander du Shayla, and an adventurer and a passerby who probably wrote it by the order of Jewish organization in 1921. Du Chaillet wrote, quote, I asked if through Mrs. K. protocols had reached S.A. Nihilus. It seemed strange to me that this huge, barely moving, broken but trials woman could ever penetrate the mysteries of the Kabbalah of Zion sages. Quote, yes, said Nihilus. Mrs. K. long lived abroad in France. There in Paris, she received this manuscript from a Russian general and gave it to me. The general managed to pull it out of the Masonic archive. I asked if the name of this general was a secret. No, replied Sergei Alexandrovich. This is General Rakovsky, a good, active man who did a lot in his time to show pull the strings of the enemies of Christ. This version, as we will see further, is not supported by facts. One more version, expressed also on behalf of Nihilus, is based on a national legend. Sergei Alexandrovich wrote, quote, after the first of his books had been published, an old and poor lady who was a landowner somewhere in Oriol province visited. She asked if Sergei would dare to publish the protocols. They remained with her after the death of her son, who in turn received them from his wife, a J, who by some circumstances was in Paris. He was loved there by a Jayish girl who later adopted Christianity and married him. She took the protocol secretly from the table her father, who was one of the Zion sages, and gave them to her fiance, saying that they could be useful in Russia. This version, too, is not supported by facts, it is purely legendary. Later, Prince N.D. Zervakov managed to clarify some details of the personal testimony of S.A. Nihilus. The prince asked Stepanov's daughter, Princess Via Golitsina, remembering what she had heard from her father. She claimed that the manuscript of the Protocols of Zion, received by her father from an A.N. Sukahoten, was in Russian, that the first edition on the rights of the manuscript without indicating the printing house where it was printed was also in Russian, that probably the manuscript received by her father was the original manuscript, which in Sukahoten received from an anonymous lady, and it is known whether it was previously translated into Russian from another language, that S.A. Nihilus received from her father the same Russian manuscript which her father had received from A.N. Sukahoten. The main conclusion the main conclusion when considering these versions are the following. The protocols were stolen from a secret Masonic vault. The manuscript of the protocols had been translated into Russian. The kidnapper and the translator of the manuscript was a woman whose name was somehow hidden even in the 1930s. According to Leslie Fry, a researcher of the protocols of Zion, this woman was Juliana Justiana Glinka, 1844 through 1918, the daughter of the former Russian ambassador to Brazil and Portugal, the maid honor of Empress Maria Feodorovna. Feodorovna. Fry, not bothering to refer to sources, composes a real detective story with court intrigue. According to this story, Glinka was a secret Russian agent in Paris. In 1884, she managed to gain access to the secret vaults of the Masonic Lodge, Mitzrium. She bribed the member Schwartz Shapiro, and he took the protocols out the vault for 2,500 francs and let her copy them for one night. Having made a copy of the document, Glinka urgently left for Petersburg, where she handed it over to Generals Orzovsky and Cherevin to then be handed over to Alexander III. However, Cherevin, fearing the revenge of the Jays, was afraid to hand over the protocols to the Tsar. The Freemasons learned of the loss and began to pursue Schwartz, who was forced to flee to Egypt. But the Freemasons found him there and killed him, so the French police testify. Even under these conditions, Glinka does not lose hope of publishing the document. She intercedes for it before the highest echelons of the empire, but the sages of Zion wanted to destroy the witness to their secret. There, in an intrigue then against Glinka, in 1890 in Paris, a Russophobic book was published titled, quote, Holy Russia, Court, Army, Clergy, Bourgeoisie, and People, and the cover was marked in the name of the author, Paul Vasily. Alexander was told that this was in fact the maiden Glinka. Having acquainted himself with this really dirty book, the Tsar ordered the exile of its, quote, author to a family estate in the country. In fact, the author of this Russophobic book was a French writer, Juliette Aden. who used the materials of Princess Demidova Donato, Princess Radziwill, and the services of the Jewish writer Ilya Zion. 1. Fry's version is based on rumors and speculation, has little validity. Validity is quite true only of what relates to the release of the anti-Russian book by Paul Vasily and the indignant reaction of Tsar Alexander III. The rest of the facts cited by Fry cannot be verified. In 1922, another version of the emergence of protocols in Russia was put forward by Colonel F. Winsberg. The Russian government, wrote Winsberg, quote, has known for many centuries the bloody path followed by the Jays, and knew who prompted the murder of its kings and dignitaries. It also knew that the Jays and Freemasons are actively implementing a plan to overthrow all the thrones and altars, partly implemented in the 18th century. Therefore, whenever it became known that the Zionists in the fall of 1897 decided to convene a congress in Basel, the Russian government, as we were told by a person who for many years held a prominent place in one of the ministries in St. Petersburg, sent there such an agent. The latter bribed a Jay who enjoyed the trust of the Masons high authority, and at the end of the Congress was commissioned to deliver the report of the secret meetings in Frankfurt, for where the Jewish Lodge, founded on August 16, 1907, where the name, quote, Towards the Dawn, kept in touch with the Great Orient of France. So this is noteworthy that all the documents that I've seen, supposedly Lenin was a part of this Great Orient of France for a century. This trip was a splendid occasion to carry out the intended enterprise. On the way, the messenger spent the night in a small town where a Russian agent was waiting for him, with a group of scribes who took copies of the documents overnight. The haste of such a secret night's work could naturally reflect on some incompleteness of the work of reports, which were compiled in French. It is also very likely that the person who sold the secret of his fellow tribesmen on the system of all the as ifs always prey on two fronts, could conceal an important part of the work of Congress in the text of the protocols. We did not see any direct resolution on the nearest practically planned actions, but nevertheless, in their aggregate, the copies made gave a very complete program of revolutionary goals and the revolutionary tactics painted with a pure hatred for the Christian faith, for the Christian world. Subsequently, the Wittenberg version was slightly modified. The protocols were written off not abroad in one of the cities lying on the road from Basel to Frankfurt, as previously assumed, but Verzibalov, whom Naum Sukolov moved the Russian border. In this version, the lady is also mysterious, but still she was helped by agents of the police who carried out technical tasks of their own. That is arranged so that Sokolov was forced to stay for a day, and Verzibalov put him to sleep and gave the lady a copy of the protocols for so long that she could get a copy of them. Russian journalist M.O. Minshkakov contributed to the creation of a new version about the ways of the protocols appeared in Russia. I've read this really. I remember all this for some reason. I shouldn't remember it because I thought we ended on page 50, but apparently not. How's everybody doing? We got Neurojack here. What's up, my man? We got Sandman. Hello. Yeah, I am. Thank you guys. So, here we go. We're gonna continue. Practically planned actions, but nevertheless, in their aggregate, the copies gave a very complete program of revolutionary goals and revolutionary tactics, painted with pure hatred for the Christian faith, for the Christian world. Subsequently, the Wittenberg version was slightly modified. Protocols were written off, not abroad, in one of the cities lying on the road. But I already read that. Okay, hold on. Deep secrecy. He wrote down from this lady's words, recently have been hidden in nice, long, chosen as the secret capital of Jewry. But such a frivolous age, these protocols have been stolen. They fell into the hands of a French journalist, and from him somehow to my elegant hostess. She said that she translated the excerpts from the precious documents in Russian with great haste and thought that it was better to hand them over to me. A significant element of uncertainty in all previous versions of the appearance of the protocols in Russia leads to the idea that this document could have been brought to Russia by some of the representatives of Jewish Masonic circles and somehow fell into the hands of Russian writers and journalists. This version has not been worked out before, but is quite possible. If we assume that the protocols were created by the Masonic Order of the Rose and the Cross, or Memphis Mitrium, or the likely ways to get them into Russia was the arrival in St. Petersburg of the master of the order, Martinus Papias, that's 1900, and his friend Philip, 1899. Both Masons managed to penetrate from some time deep into the Russian court, and even tried to create a Masonic lodge there, which of course failed. And it is known that they tried to involve many courtiers into their organization. Uh, so I looked into this, this organization, Memphis Midstream or whatever it is. Uh, and if you just like Google them and look at their website, they openly say they practice the Kabbalah and Gnosticism, and they're involved with the Rose on the Cross. I mean, they're pretty open with what they do. And I looked up one of their leaders, and he was like connected to the Templars and like 10 other, Masonic rites in some way. So, but, I had these Templars kind of, attacked me on Twitter, and they were like, we don't accept them as actual, but they just lie about everything. They, they're on damage control a lot of times. So, anyways, it's just known that they tried to involve many courtiers into their organization. It should be recalled that Sukhotin and Stepanov, who first came into the hands of the protocols, were close to the court sphere and later became chamberlains of the court. Stories about the theft of the protocols in France, a mysterious woman who, according to some researchers, was Glinka, most likely deliberate disinformation in order not to compromise the royal court. The founder of the Zionist movement, T. Herzl, could bring the Zionist protocols to Russia in August 1903. He came to St. Petersburg in order to gain the support of Zionism from the Russian government. Meeting with the Minister of Internal Affairs, V.K. Plev, Count S. Viti, or Vit, I don't know, and a number of other Russian statesmen, Herzl tried to deceive them and present Zionism as a harmless movement. For the for the return of the Jays to Palestine, rather than as a global. So Herzl tried to deceive them and present Zionism as a heartless movement for the return to the Jays to Palestine. That's pretty interesting. Rather than as a global subversive organization that unites all Jays of the world in the struggle to achieve the goals of Talmudic Judaism. The left, who agreed to support the departure of the Jays from Russia, refused to provide them with domestic loosening to the detriment of the interests of the Russian people. That was Tsar Nicholas II's position when he had a dinner with Rothschild. Rothschild said, we want equal rights for Jays in Russia, and he said, no, the Russian people are too trusting, and we'd quickly fall into the hands of the Jayish cabal. And he left the dinner, and I guess he wrote in his diary or something that he signed his death sentence that day. That was in 1910. So 7 years later, you got the revolution. So they were plotting on him for a minute, it seems. After St. Petersburg, Herzl went to Russia's city of Lena, which at that time was the ideological center of Talmudic Judaism, the Sanhedrin, and the residence of the Vilna Gaon, called New Jerusalem among the Jays. It was also the center of a Hasidic sect of Jays led by Lubavitcher rabbis. The head of world Zionism was accepted by the Sanhedrin and the Gaon as a triumphator. Quote, though excited Jewish lanes, writes Herzl, I nevertheless brought to the administration of the Jewish community were representatives, Golan Hasidism, and crowds of delegations were waiting for me. Later, I would visit in the hotel by various delegations who presented me with gifts, and again, crowds dispersed by the police were gathering. After the reception of the delegation in the country house of one of the members of the Sanhedrin, uh, Barnyakov, a banquet was held in honor of Herzl, before which political issues were discussed in a narrow circle. The banquet was toasted for the speedy establishment of Jewish power, and some of them present drank to Herzl as the future king of the Jays. Here's how Herzl himself remembered this, quote, a young worker in a blue blouse caught my eye. His coarse, decisive features gave me reason to believe that he is one of the revolutionary Bundys, but he struck me with a health retort in honor of the time when, quote, King Herzl will rule. It is possible that it was on this evening that Herzl shared with his comrades in arms ideas from the protocols, which were already always in harmony with his own thoughts. Although Herzl was not the author of this document, the rumors cemented this honor for him. 13 years after his death in 1917, in Moscow, a brochure entitled Extracts from the Protocols of the First Zionist Congress were which was held in Basel, reported to the Council of Elders Prince of Exile, Theodor Herzl, was published. The extracts were based on protocols 1 through 12, 14 through 15, 17, and 23. It's an interesting coincidence. Herzl left Russia on 17th August 1903, and the protocols began to be published in mass circulation in newspapers. Zinamoya from 27 August of the same year. Once again, analyzing all versions of the appearance of the protocols in Russia, with a full century, we can only dwell on the version of F.P. Nova. It proves true, though it is absolutely obvious that Stepanov does not agree. He does not now name the real source of the protocols. Stepanov's version, in particular, confirmed the existence of the 1895 edition, which was kept in the Lenin Library of the USSR as early as the 30s. In the 60s, which I checked the library's holdings, this copy had mysteriously disappeared. Researchers were working with this copy told me that the title of its cover was written in Slavic script and that the text was rewritten by hand or two or three styles of handwriting. There is a firm evidence of the existence of the 1897 edition in Tula, provincial printing house. This edition was used to draw up a secret document in the U.S. State Department. It was passed there apparently by Boris Brozel, military intelligence officer of Russia and later writer. The English researcher Norman Cohn, who studied this edition, stated that the excerpts from the Tula edition of 1897 are, quote, almost identical to the text later published by Nilus, which is the basis for all subsequent editions around the world. At the end of the 19th century and at the very beginning of the 20th century, hundreds of copies of the protocols were spread throughout Russia. Many of them were printed on typewriters, even copied by hand. As G.B. Salisbury, for example, wrote, the protocols of Zion were first spread in Petersburg back in 1899. Quote, one of the copy manuscripts fell into the hands of F.J. Witt, and he commissioned me to write a note on this subject, which I gave him. The text of this note remains in the archive in St. Petersburg, where, widespread publication of the protocols during the Russian-Japanese War and the Jewish Revolution in Russia. Okay, Since 1895, the protocols have been in Russia for 9 years. The document was so monstrous that the Russian people did not want to believe in the possibility of its reality. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 through 1905, and the revolution that began when it dispelled all doubts. The Russo-Japanese War was unleashed by Jewish circles in the United States and England. Jewish bankers Rothschild, Schiff, Warburg, Milner provided Japan with huge loans for the war with Russia. From the United States alone, the Japanese government received a credit line of 400 million. A meeting of the opposition of the revolutionary parties was held in Paris with the money of the Jewish banker Yakov Schiff. All subversive, anti-Russian forces united under uh, auspices of Jewish leaders. A war of thereby unleashed against our people. The money of international Jewish bankers was used by a send of a large number of weapons to Russia for the militants. The whole country was swamped with terror and the mass murder of Russian statesmen, government officials, army, and police. Thousands of the best Russian people had been killed out of the darkness by the most despicable methods. The words of the protocols and the quote, J system of the crumbling Goyim governments were fully implemented. Quote, we will show our power to one of them by assassination, i.e., terror, and if we allow their rebellion against us, we will respond with American, Chinese, and Japanese guns. Protocol 7. Let us recall that these words in the protocols were recorded long before the Russian-Japanese War. Realizing that the plans of the authors of the protocols began to be implemented in the most horrible forms, and the Antichrist attack on Russia had become irreversible, those Russians who had the document in their hands decided to publish it. The first published the protocols with a Russian writer and prominent public figure, Pavel Alexandrovich Khrushchev. That was in 1860 to 1909. Jewish bandits from secret organizations repeatedly tried to kill him. One seriously wounded him, but even this could not intimidate him. A few months before the war and the revolution, he tried to warn the government about the beginning of the, quote, Jewish Masonic offensive. Revolutionary struggle against the Russia, as we have known, began simultaneously with the Russo-Japanese War in January 1904. It was in this month that the subversive Liberal Masonic Union of Liberation, headed by Masonic P.B. Struve, was transferred from Switzerland to Russia. Khrushchev was the publisher of the newspaper Znamya, a publication that bravely and uncompromisingly stood against the enemies of the fatherland. From August 28 to September 7, 1903, the full text of the protocols was published in 9 issues of the newspaper in this title, Programs for the Conquest of the World by the Jays. The foreword and afterword to the publication were apparently written by Khrushchev himself. In addition, in the banner was printed an article by S.A. Nilus, editor or someone related to him? Question mark. The text of the protocols in the newspaper is noticeably different from the one by S.A. Nihilus. The protocols themselves were received by Khrushchev, apparently from Nihilus. However, Khrushchev processed the text somewhat freely, trying to adapt it to the realities of Russia. How's everybody doing? Thank you. Yeah. So what are we saying? What are we saying? I thought that you had an honor to anybody along the comment, man. That's what I could say. That's why I'm definitely far from a holy man. Yeah, it really is. And what's up, Isaac? Dogma free. What's up, my boy? Okay. All right. So let's get back to this. Okay. So the editorial staff of the Kazan Telegraph directly connected activities of the Jewish organization with the revolutionary events in Russia. So the protocols were entitled, quote, The Role of the Jays in the Russian Revolution. The key to understanding the main source and main agent of all the unrest and misfortunes that have gripped and devastated Russia in recent years. Shortly before the October uprising of the anti-Russian forces in Moscow, the Tsar contributed to the publication of the Protocols. They were published under the title, quote, Ancient and New Protocols of the Assembly of the Sages of Zion. It is said that they are handed over to the confused Jewish warriors on the barricades, after which many of them turned their weapons against. Editors note, the J's of those that handed out the protocols. It's got a question mark there. Khrushchev's publication became the basis for a number of other publications carried out by the famous Russian public figure Georgy Vasilyevich uh, Butmi, something like this, 1856 to 1927. Jewish terrorists tried to kill this courageous man many times, sending blackmailers to him. One of them, a certain dint, who threatened him with weapons. Butmi shot him, and the court acquitted him back in 1898. Butmi published the book, quote, Capital and Debt, which revealed the essence of the parasitic Jewish capital, which created a world economic order that allows a bunch of Jewish bankers to manage the absolute majority of humanity. Butmi proved that financial manipulation of gold enriches Jewish bankers at the expense of the rest of humanity. The natural resources of the countries are transferred under the power of international businessmen, and industries suffer great losses. Economic resources of Russia and other countries are automatically pumped over in favor of the Jewish masters, which only the firm authority of the autocratic state can stop. Having taken possession of the protocols, Butmi was struck by the similarity of the ominous designs figured in the protocols with his own conclusions, which he had made while studying the activities of Jewish bankers. Butmi edited the text of the protocols, made small inserts on the Russian themes about wine, monopoly, banking, and finance. At the end of 1905 in St. Petersburg, Butmi printed his first edition of the protocol stakes under the name, quote, The Root of Our Disasters, and with a headline corresponding to the text of the document itself, quote, Where is the root of the modern disorder in the social order of Europe in general, and Russia in particular? Excerpts from the ancient and modern protocols of the Zion elders of the World Society of Freemasons. The publication was permitted to be widely published on December 12, 1905. At the very apogee, I don't know, some word I'm dumb, uh, of subversion by the satanic Jewish forces against the Russia, in the bloodbath of revolutionary crimes and mass murder. Russians, this modest text proved to be a convincing answer to many questions of that time. Within 2 or 3 weeks, the protocols were sold out everywhere. Less than a month after the publication of the first edition, on January 11, 1906, in St. Petersburg, Butmin, with the support of the Union of the Russian People, issued a second, supplemented edition, but under a different name. Quote, Presentations Enemies of the Human Race, and with the title preceding the text, quote, Protocols extracted from the secret vaults of the Zion head office were the root of modern disorder in the social order of Europe in general and in Russia in particular have arisen. Um, uh, forward to this publication was signed by Butmi himself. The book also included, quote, Help on the Jays, and its, quote, rabbi's speech. And afterwards, in this form, the protocols were published in St. Petersburg 5 more times, 3 in 1906 and 2 in 1907. In addition, the publication of Butmi was reissued in Kazan in 1906 under the title Excerpt from the Masonic Protocols. So I mean, it's seeming that I didn't know all this. I thought Essay Nihilus was the first to publish the text. So I mean, so apparently it'd been out there, uh, around that time. Um, I don't think anybody's denying that they were maybe took from older ideas, but I mean, this thing's been happening a long time. Um, like the French Revolution and all that. They like that. These type of ideas have been circulating. So in 1905, almost simultaneously, the first edition of Butvi, another publication, the Protocols, was published, carried out by the outstanding Russian spiritual writer Sergei Alexandrovich Nilus. That was in 1862 through 1929. The protocols were included in the second edition of his book, quote, "The Great Within the Small" and "Antichrist," and an imminent political possibility, notes of an Orthodox believer. Um, this publication later became a classic. It was on this basis that a subsequent, after 1919 edition of the Protocols in many countries of the world were carried out. In just 3 years of the Jewish Revolution in Russia, 1904 through 1907, there were published at least 17 editions of the Protocols. They were read out of the meetings and in military units, discussed in families, distributed among relatives, friends, and neighbors. To many Russian people, they opened their eyes to the nature of what happened in Russia, and it certainly played a role in the consolidating their efforts against the dangerous and secret enemy. Despite the widespread use of the protocols, no revolutionary Jewish or Masonic organization at the time dared to protest them as a forgery. The correspondence between what was happening and the plans of the authors of the protocols apparently struck or persuaded not only the Russian people, but also the Talmudic Jews and the Masons. The original version of the protocols was not divided into chapters, represented a series of arbitrary passages. In the newspaper version of Khrushchevan, this feature of the original was preserved, but Boutmy provided the text into 27 protocols, and Nihilus into 24. However, Nihilus began to number the protocols, only stating that the 1911 edition in his 1905 edition, the protocols were not broken down, but only stated, quote, "the next protocol," another, quote, protocol. And all this, once again, showed that Khrushchev and Nihilus dealt directly with the original source. And Boutmy used and worked on the text they had already prepared. At the same time, it is clear that the idea to organize the text of the protocols and number them belonged to Boutmy. In publishing this version of the protocols, Boutmy used the text from the Znamyo newspaper, eliminating the preface and afterwards written by Shivan. The differences in the text of the protocols in the Khrushchevan and Boutmy versions are relatively small. And the 17th protocol, Boutmy, the 15th protocol, Nihilus, does not have the paragraph mysticism of power, which Nihilus and Khrushchevan have. And the 21st protocol, Boutmy, the 17th from Nile, does not have a large paragraph about the bar, which is contained in the Khrushchevan and Nihilus. In the 23rd protocol, Boutmy made a number of additions, formulating the essence of the financial policy of the Jewish bankers. A few inserts from Booth also introduced in the protocol number 27. The last 10 lines in the protocols are absent from Khrushchevan and Nihilus. That is, they are written by Booth himself to explain the ideas of the protocols. There are much more differences in the text of the protocols between Khrushchevan and Boutmy versions, and on the one hand, and the Nihilus version on the other. The latter has de-edited and the original more thoroughly. The text of the Nihilist protocols is more advanced in form and better systemized. The Nihilist not only gave its numbering to the protocols, but also introduced explanatory headings, subheadings, in front of each one of them, making it easier to work with the text. Okay. So it says persecution of the protocols by the interim government, burning of the quote revolutionary document by revolutionary soldiers, attempting to blame the Russian police, shortened edition of the protocols of Zion in Moscow, Russian autocracy, the main enemy of Judaism. So. The revolution of 1917 in Russia became a turning point in human history. It was with this revolution that the practical construction of an international Jewish kingdom in the Judeo-Talmudic world order began. To the most, protocol seemed a delusional utopian idea of Talmud fanatics, but in 1917 it became a fate accomplished. However, the Jewish character of the revolution in Russia was not denied by the Jays themselves. Quote, the revolution in Russia, wrote prominent Zionist Jacob D. Haas, quote, is a Jewish revolution, for it is a turning point in Jewish history. I mean, they didn't deny it, so, um, and as the Catacomb Saints say, and I believe it's written in Father Seraphim Rose's book, Russia's Catacomb Saints. He said, today in Russia, tomorrow in America. And I think we're kind of experiencing this today, you know, whether people know it or not. This situation is due to the fact that Russia is home to approximately half the total number of Jays living in the world, and therefore the overthrow of the despotic government should have a huge impact on the fate of millions of Jays, both living in Russia and those many thousands who have recently immigrated in other countries. Moreover, the revolution in Russia is Jayish, and also Jays are the most active revolutionaries of the Tsarist Empire. The last edition of the book, Nihilus, quote, there is near at the door about what they do not want to be believed, and what is so close. Containing the text of the Protocols, was published a month before the abdication of Emperor Nicholas II, in 5,000 copies. The Masonic Provisional Government, which seized power, had among its first acts the issuing of an order signed by A.F. Kerensky to destroy the entire circulation of the, quote, reactionary book. A team of revolutionary soldiers came to the book warehouse, pulled them out, and burned them. From the entire circulation remained a little more than a tenth, about 600 copies. Hold on one second. Okay, so it turns out, I'm gonna have to cut this short because I gotta. It turns out I have stuff to do. So I'm sorry, guys, but I mean, maybe I'll come back afterwards when I get done doing what I'm doing, and I'll return with the reading. So I appreciate everybody that tuned in, and I thank you for being here tonight. And yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah. All right. Talk soon.